Hi, everybody. Welcome to Conversations with Calvin, We the Species. Chronologically, this is the last day of February, and it snowed 1/10 of 1 inch last night here in New Jersey. Wow, I saw a few snowflakes. It was wonderful. I went outside, I stuck my tongue out, and I felt a snowflake on my tongue. I used to do that when I was a little kid growing up, but it disappeared really fast. Anyway, I want to do a little bit of a monologue, and I want to introduce John Christian momentarily, but I also want to read because I can't even remember this. Just to hook you all in, I've been around a long time. I'm a big fan of movies. I watch old movies endlessly and the whole Hollywood thing, and I'm just an old movie person. I'm a movie person, period. I was in a few movies. And John Christian could easily be a screenplay because your life and the things that I've learned from you and the things I've read and see and listen, your life really is. There was an old TV show way back called "This Is Your Life." Well, this is your life. You've had such an amazing life, and I'm really thrilled and honored that you're here with me now. I'm thrilled and honored that we were put together, and we put together. I might as well acknowledge Gary Hill, a dear friend. I've never met him in person, but dear friend. We've been friends for a year and a half. Yeah. He's a wonderful guy, and we both have to acknowledge him because he's right. Very special, and he put John and I together. He just celebrated his 25th anniversary, give or take, on Music Street Journal. Out there in Illinois. He is Tales of Wonder and Dread. I've interviewed Gary in a collection of his writers. They've done Lifeblood 2, Vampire Tales, horror. It's taken me into that world. So I can't thank Gary enough for being a good friend and being loyal and always being open and knowing how to put people together, as he put John and I together. So officially, here's the title of what you're going to see, ladies and gentlemen. John Christian, podcaster. The name of his podcast is Tell Me About Your Book. And we're going to talk about that too, because he celebrates self-publishing, of which I am one, a self-publisher, publishee. So he's an author, he's a musician, a composer, a singer, songwriter. He's been in film, TV, production, does editing, and this is coming live from Nova Scotia, Canada, where I was a few years ago exploring the Bay of Fundy, which was a bucket list thing for me. So again, folks, hang on. This is going to be quite a little trip and journey with John, and this official monologue is now concluded, John. So the best way to start, if you would a little background. I mean, your background and how you arrived where you arrived is fascinating as well. So take it away,
well,
please.
It's interesting that I ended up in Nova Scotia. I've been living here for 5 years. I spent 40 years in Toronto, raised in Montreal, but we arrived in Nova Scotia as Hungarian refugees back in 1958. Wow. And I've got pictures of the boat and everything, and me walking my first few steps, some park in Halifax, I guess. I've been meaning to go out and try and find it. Maybe there's a landmark or so. So back in Nova Scotia, I ended up back here after I retired from television. I worked in film, ADR, post-production editing, started there. I did a little bit of post-audio in between film and television when I was a semi-professional musician. I would say professional. I did make a living at it for a small amount of money that I did for about 6 years. And then during that time, I got married and had a son, and he was 4 years old. When I looked down, I thought, I can do better than this. Besides, I don't think I really want to be a rock star. And I was 33 years old and picked up the phone, called up some old contacts, got right back into film editing, worked on 2 more films. Yeah. But in Canada, the film industry was taking a big dip, and Anyway, the tax breaks weren't there for people to make films, and so I transitioned into television, where I worked at CTV Television Network for 15 years.
Wow.
I worked in the news department at first, and then eventually into sales and promotion. I edited those short things that tell you what to watch, when to watch it. And I had a divorce, and at that point, I also got laid off from work, and about a year afterwards, everything sort of fell apart. It took me a little while, but I got back on my feet and I got into production, something I really wanted to do, which is actually edit television shows rather than regurgitate them at the network. Mind you, I did learn a lot of really cool things working at the network, some of which has rubbed off on me on my podcast. I seem to be producing it like an old television show that I used to work on. And then I worked on a series of reality television shows. That's what I did, and they're not easy to edit. Those are the kind where they're trying to make something out of something that really isn't something.
Right, right.
So yeah. So in fact, my book writing, I used to wonder, over the last 3 years I've been writing fiction, where am I getting the discipline from that I could do this and edit it? And I remembered, well, that's what we did in these reality television shows. We started with nothing, just an idea, and then a few weeks later we have what looks like a story. I hate to burst a bubble, but it's generally not exactly true, sort of true, and we just make it really sound interesting. So that's how I write books now. To tell you the truth, sometimes I confuse my chapters for episodes, but that's another story. So that's who I am now. Oh, I had a brain aneurysm, and you can tell that I survived that. The unfortunate thing was that when I had the brain aneurysm, it was one day before an 8-month contract in Toronto, and at top scale, we could have really used the money. So the day before, I went grocery shopping, and apparently I don't remember getting on the streetcar in Toronto, but I did, because that's where it happened. And that's where my brain aneurysm happened. And they took me to the hospital, and well, they saved my life, but it ended my career. So then I retired and I moved here. I bought this house with my wife about 3 years before I had the brain aneurysm. It was a plan that we were going to have to retire here. She's from Nova Scotia.
Uh-huh.
And so that's how we ended up here, and a little prematurely, but here I am.
Hey, it's great. In your life, you talk about some life-changing things. One of the life-changing things is you started guitar at an early age.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, age 10, went to grade 5, and there was talk of there's going to be male teachers. And I only had female teachers, or, ladies teaching us. And sure enough, I got a male teacher, and I was a little nervous, but turned out to be a wonderful man. His name was Frank Murray. And I just love the man to this day for what he did. He was a great teacher, and he also offered guitar lessons. Well, I went straight home after the first day of school, and I told my father about his guitar lessons that he's offering. And my father was very much into the arts, and he had no problem. We went to Eaton's. Used to be a store here, and maybe it still is in Canada. I forget now. Anyway, $15 is what he paid for a Winston acoustic guitar, and the rest is, as they say, history. Well, actually, 2 years later, when I was 12 years old, my father, I asked for an electric guitar. We bought a secondhand Fender Mustang with a little amplifier and a foot pedal.
Wow.
And yeah, and from there on, I was just hooked, totally.
We'll shortly talk about your music career. Another life-changing thing that helped mold you was when you were 16, you climbed mountains, correct?
Yes, oh yeah, I keep forgetting to mention that. I've been talking about my books, but yeah, the mountain climbing experiences that I had has affected me very positively, and has taught me a lot of things about endurance and patience. Post-production does that too. But yes, my mountain climbing experiences all took place around Lake Placid in upstate New York,
Wow.
in what is called the high peaks of the Adirondack range. So I could have, if I wanted to have, but it didn't really interest me, to become a 46er. I certainly have climbed more than 46 times between age 16 and 46. And to be a 46er, you have to climb all 46 mountains over 4,000 feet high. Now that sounds easy, but it's not. And I didn't do all of them. And I just climbed the mountains I like to climb. I climbed Mount Marcy 7 times. That's the tallest one. So I just like climbing. I would go in at first. Well, it was a friend of mine when we moved downtown Montreal. A friend of mine that I make friends with, who helped me get into the film industry, by the way, a really close friend of mine still to this day. He introduced me to the mountain climbing because he was a 46er when I met him. We're the same age. And so once I started doing that, I was hooked. And I would go take my vacations through my
Wow.
30s when I was in television. I would take my vacations to go down there, and
Wow.
I'd work extra hours to get extra days off so I can go in country for 5, 6, 7 days. Yeah.
Wow. That is so, I can't process mountain climbing, but part of that experience of the mountain climbing got energized to help you write a trilogy, correct?
It certainly the trilogy has the theme of putting a backpack on and hiking through trails, sometimes up and down mountains.
I want to
get
show,
somewhere.
I have a part of
Yeah.
I have your trilogy here.
Yeah, that's the
They
third
call
book.
it-
Yep,
And
exactly.
there's that backpack. And
It's
then
just
The Way to Kialo, a fictional analysis of delusion. I mean, these are great titles. But there you are with the backpack again. And then the Barnabas Trail,
right.
which is a fictional analysis of anti-intellectualism. This is great stuff. Again, all
Just
mountain
trails.
climbing
Yeah,
themed.
I'm fascinated with trails. I had to give it up at 46 for a number of reasons. My knees gave out, number one. I also took a big financial dip because, as I said, I got divorced and lost a house and everything. It took me a while to get back on my feet, and by the time I did, you need to have strong legs and strong knees. It's just, yeah, no longer was it something I would do, but I live it in my head over and over again. So when I did write the trilogy, which didn't start as a trilogy, unless you have another question, I only wrote the first book, and then it became a trilogy. We can talk about that later. I had to have a model by which to have this person go from where I wanted them to go from to where I wanted them to go to. And I figured trails, mountains, backpack, canteen of water, all the things I know. Well, that's what this person goes through.
So when you're mountain climbing, you set up a little tent and you sleep in a tent and stuff.
Yeah. And in the beginning, we were able to take the chance and get our water from fast running streams, if it went over moss and things like that. But came a point by the 90s, you're ill-advised to do that. So you could boil it, or I bought, because my friend stopped climbing and I just kept doing it on my own in my 30s and into my 40s. I climbed by myself. Kind of a dangerous thing to do.
Yeah, that sure is.
Yeah, I used a filter and to filter the water. No cell phone either, so I never hurt myself. Then got lucky.
Wow. We have we've got some elements and particulates of commonality, but one thing for sure we don't have, I wouldn't even walk around the block, much less up a mountain. Although I'm fascinated by mountains, I would go out to Sedona, Arizona 12 times and do actually I did climb a mountain. My son was with me. It was one of those vortex mountains where they have this tremendous amount of spiritual, and it's actually the back cover of my first book is me sitting on a mountaintop barefoot.
There you go. Yeah.
So actually, talking to you, I realized I didn't sleep over, but I did climb. There's
Mountains
nothing
are
in the
spiritual.
world.
They're very spiritual experiences.
Yeah.
They really are. Yeah.
Yeah. There's nothing in walking in the forest. Walking in the forest, and I've written about that. And I'm listening to talk about it, and it hit me that I did similar stuff, but not like you. But there's nothing in the world like the silence, the pure silence, in the air.
There's nothing like the darkness when it sets in, and you know you're going to stay over the night. You want to make sure everything's in place because it's going to get dark, really dark,
Pure dark.
yeah. And then there's bears and wolves and stuff.
Yeah,
You should be aware of that. Yeah.
sure. Just like, the Wizard of Oz,
Mhm.
lions and tigers and bears,
Yeah.
not for me. But anyway, moving on. With all this, and you've touched a little bit about your editing and the production, the reality, a TV show, and all this, but you also were very successful. You built a band,
Several bands, yeah.
several bands, and I'm reading my notes. One was called Varoshi Fame, which achieved a real modicum of success.
Yeah, strangely enough, that's the one that got most attention. Yeah, big crowds, television interest, and we
Wow.
were interviewed. We did a mini US tour. But it's I had to write a book. My first book, and my first time out in 2015, I wrote a book called Unfolded and Grown. And it was meant to explain why I did Varoshi Fame.
Yeah.
Because there were people in my life who, when they saw what I was doing, thought I was crazy because I did not play guitar in that band. I did not sing.
You
I
drummer?
played metal objects, found objects, some drums, car springs, a bathtub, a kitchen sink, you name it, flanges, oxygen tanks, whatever. I had a station with all these things around me. Now, it started small, but it grew. And it was rhythmical, and I had a lot of people in the music world that I could call on, other drummers that I got along with, and it wasn't a band as much, it was an ensemble that changed personnel almost from show to show, depending on who was available. I remained constant, and my wife at the time, she became the vocalist, and I'm not, we're divorced now, but I'm not saying anything bad about her. She would be the first to admit she can't sing. She doesn't have a very good voice. But this was avant-garde music, like really weird stuff. But the rhythms had to be solid. So I provided the rhythms, I wrote the lyrics, and she was kind of just the front person, and she just kind of looked good and just danced around and sang and spoke these words that I wrote. And we were very popular in art galleries and festivals of, sort of artsy fartsy kind of
Wow.
things.
Wow.
Universities really liked us and that sort of thing. So, but for me to finally get into the limelight like that, other bands I was in was, okay. But finally, like newspapers writing about us, we're on television, I think,
Wow.
and people don't even know I play guitar or that I sing. So it was very strange 4 years.
Wow.
Yeah. Yeah. That's what
Um,
my first book is about. Like, why did I do that?
which is so interesting because it wasn't you.
No, it wasn't really. It was an experiment, and the book explains it. But the main thing, just so you know, the main thing was I was a sound effects ADR editor at the time. I was working with sound effects, and I was noticing how I could make like loops and things and experimenting. And the next thing you know, I was called up to be part of a William Burroughs festival. And I'd never say no. I said, sure, a William Burroughs Festival. What do you want me to do? Well, we'll give you 15 minutes. You can do whatever you want. Okay. Well, I'm right now experimenting with sound effects and looping sounds and stuff. So I did that. And they loved it. And the next thing you know, I'm getting a phone call from 6 months later, I'm getting a call from one of the top concert promoters in Toronto asking me if I can do something like that. They're having this band from England come in.
Wow.
And I kind of did, but this time I did it with real rhythmic stuff in front of 5,000 people. And seriously, that just turned everything around and became crazy. Yeah, just shot off like crazy.
So, just out of curiosity, I did some music journalism in my 10, 12 years ago. It was part of my growth as a journalist. But some of your influences, some of the music, your band's favorite bands, some of your influences, because you did become a composer and rather extensive.
Yeah. Well, I would say, when I was in my teens, I would say Jimi Hendrix, and he only had 4 studio albums or something. But yeah, definitely that influenced my guitar playing a lot. But I also liked Jethro Tull, again in the 70s. Jethro Tull was really big for me. Progressive music was big. When Peter Gabriel was in Genesis, I liked that type of Genesis with Peter Gabriel. And Pink Floyd. I mean, Pink Floyd was pretty much a staple in the 70s for me. Even Supertramp to a certain degree. And then the 80s came around, and none of that stuff meant that all that much, because I discovered bands like Boomtown Rats and Talking Heads and The Clash, and that was cool. Then Killing Joke, and then into things like Test Department, Einsteins and Neubauten, and some really weird. The Cure was a big one for me in the 80s. When it was all over, when I retired from music and I called it quits, I did my last show, and the television station was there and everything. We went simulcast. That was it. I turned back to my old friends, which I was originally in a band with them in the late 70s, and we reformed, picked up my Stratocaster, and went back to playing sort of blues-oriented,
Right.
Soulful stuff, and that's what I've been doing ever since.
Those-
Now, another major influence, I guess, in terms of how I write, sometimes how I compose. I say compose because there's no lyrics in that, or I maybe sample sounds. Would be Brian Eno. He had a major influence in me on how I approach production.
Okay.
Yeah.
So you're a composer, and you've written songs. Is there? I always like to ask this as a fellow writer. Do you have a process when you do this? The writing.
When it's a lyrical song,
Yeah.
it
Yeah.
happens simultaneously with the guitar or a piano and lyrics. The last time I wrote lyrical music was in June of 2018.
Okay.
So that shows you that, I haven't done it for a while.
Okay.
But I've composed other things that aren't lyrical, and they're like longer pieces, and they're instrumental and they're orchestral, and that process takes place entirely on the computer.
Okay.
And I work with the tracks on the keyboard and sampling and whatever. Maybe I edit the pieces. There's a lot of editing that goes on in those pieces. Yeah.
Okay.
And the most recent work that I did like that was in 2022, the spring. So it's about a year ago.
Okay. I forewarned you, John, that I was going to go off topic. I always like to ask this, and it's one of my favorite questions to ask, and I use it a lot but you don't have to answer it, and it's a one-word answer basically, but you can go beyond. There's no rules here. So here goes. Excluding family or friends, somebody living or dead you'd like to spend a day with.
Penny Rimbaud. Yeah. And I may just get him on my show. Actually, I've been in communication with him, and if I could, I would go to England and spend a day with him, and he'd be open to that.
Wow.
And most people don't know who Penny Rimbaud is. I'm not familiar with his real name. I just know him as Penny Rimbaud, and he is he's 82, so he's the original founder of an organization called Crass in England, and without getting political, because it's an apolitical movement.
Okay.
It did solidify a lot of the ways I think, even to this day.
Okay. That's a great answer. Great. When we're done, I'm going to Google. I'm just telling you, I'm gonna Google him and kind of check it out. My curiosity.
You can see him on YouTube. He's even up till about 3 years ago, he's been in interviews. He's very easy. He's approachable.
Okay.
Very
Cool.
approachable.
Okay, cool. So let's talk a little bit about your writing career. And I'd love to know more about Subversive, My Life as an Artist. So
brand new cover.
It's so intriguing. So talk about that. When did you do this?
Well, I keep doing it, and hopefully it's done. No, is actually, it's been done for a while. My wife said something to me, didn't mean anything bad by it. It was August, I think, of 2019, 2019. And she said, I like your music, and most people would too, but you know what? It's really hard to understand like your lyrics and some of those non-lyrical pieces. Like, I don't know what it's about. Like, I said, really? Okay. I thought about it and figured, okay, well, what I'll do is I'll take everything I ever wrote. I'll make it 2 columns. Okay, here's what I wrote, and here's the interpretation of what I wrote. And forever in time, you can just go there as a reference, and you never have to ask me. It's just there. But then it turned into something else, and I dedicate it to my son. I have one son. He's 37, and it turned into a book about my life as an artist, and I can trace it back to 1965. And I had to end somewhere. So the first edition was ended at 2019, but then 2020 came around and I'm still like being artistic and doing stuff. And the pandemic, that got me even deeper into other art projects. So I figured, I guess I should, round it out to 2020. It'll look better too, 65 to 2020, and 2019 is an odd number. And so then I took it down, and I re-edited it, and added 2020. So there's no chapters in it. There's a prologue, which is true. It's a true story. And then there's the epilogue, which is a made up story based on the prologue. I've just figured I'll bookend it, and it's kind of cute. And the true story is about this recurring dream that I had throughout my childhood up till about age 13 or so. And I won't get into the detail of that, but it did propel me into this way of thinking that no, I will decide for myself what I wanted to do. Now, the reason it's called Subversive is not because I think I'm a subversive. I don't. And when I was 23 in 1980, well, I'll go back to saying there's no chapters. It's just like 1965, this happened, but only pertaining to things about me being artistic. And then so on, 66 all the way. Now, when we get to like by the mid 70s to 1990, those are pretty long chapters, if you want to call it, because a lot of stuff happened, right? Because those were like the busy years when I was writing a lot, I was doing stuff, I was playing a lot, I was going here and there. And like you saw, I think you mentioned earlier that you were on some television shows. I appeared on a television show as a guest star on one. So I don't only talk about my music, because I did other things too, but mainly music. And so what happened was when I was 23 in 1980, I was self-employed. I was working in film. And so I was contracted, and I was not used to how I'm supposed to pay my taxes. I was confused. I had questions. I went to the tax office and I asked some questions there, and I still wasn't understanding it. And I was asking her more and more questions, and I probably irritated her. And she turned to me and said, "Are you a subversive?" And I'm like, "No, I'm not." Like I hadn't entered my punk phase yet. I looked very nice and neat, nicely dressed. And because I went through a punk phase, by the way, as you probably know.
Yes, I do.
But at this point, I looked perfectly normal. So I didn't know, no, I'm not. A few years later, when I was in that punk phase, I thought about that lady asking me that. And I thought, well, maybe she saw something in me that I didn't see. But I'm not a subversive. I'm just someone who likes to talk about politics and religion and all this stuff that nobody else likes to talk about. That's just me. And I'm not going to talk about it here. But the dream was simple. It's about all of us children lined up like this in a line, and these adults are coming and they're whispering something to each child, and I don't know what's going on. And then one by one, the children are being led away, and like eventually it's going to be my turn, and then it never gets to that point. And I always wake up before that and say, oh, I still don't know what they want, right? So that's why I make up the epilogue, where I say that what it probably was they're telling the children what you have to do with your life. And I'm going to say, no, I'm going to do whatever I want with my life. It's my life. And that has been my personality
Well,
till now. I will do whatever I see fit for me. So, am I a subversive? No, I don't. I'm not violent. I don't do
no,
anything.
that's a
But I
great
do have
title.
labels for my idealism, and
Right.
those labels sometimes annoys people. So, because those labels mean something to me.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes. You are so original. You're just an original person, unique, and absorbing all this. And, truly, admirable journey that you've been on. Truly, and I marvel at your backdrop there. We discussed that last week.
Well, busy, isn't it? Yes.
It's a great no, it's a because where we've come out of basically the same kind of time period. Um and that bespeaks a lot because that's a special generation that we were. Anyway, so next up, I'm looking at the covers from your Kialo.
Do you know what Kialo means?
No, I don't.
Kialo, remember the Esperanto? They tried to tell us that there's going to make this language. It's called Esperanto. It's going to be the universal language and everybody's going to speak it. It was a late 70s thing.
Oh gosh, no.
Started in California. It was an idea, sort of an
Figures.
old hippie idea, but it didn't go anywhere. Yet it does exist as a language. I don't know if anybody speaks it. Well, Esperanto, if you go to Google Translate and you put it in English, the word reason, and you translate it to Esperanto, that's Kialo.
Reason.
Reason. And Axel is the lead character at first, but then meets other people. They take, become a big part of the story. It is a trilogy after all, but let's just call Axel the lead character for quite a while. Well, he lives in Widdendream. It's a city called Widdendream. It's a crazy place. Well, Widdendream, I use Google Translate a lot, by the way. Widdendream, if you put in Widdendream and it'll detect that it's German, and in English, it means delusion. So he lives in a city called Delusion, and he learns about their place called Kialo because someone tells him about it. He doesn't know about it. Someone has to tell him. Well, how do you get to this Kialo place? It's going to be a whole lot better. Reason is a whole lot better than the delusion. So, well, to do that, you have to follow this certain path, and you can't veer off that path. You got to do it through the path. And it's not going to be easy. It's going to take you a while. It's going to take you through all kinds of places that you're going to have to get through somehow. But don't give up. Eventually, you're going to meet people along the way that will help you and will encourage you and tell you what to do next. And that happens on 2 occasions, there and there. I got a map. You want to see this crazy map?
Yes.
All right.
Oh, wow.
Really, I need it in order to
Wow.
here, I'll move this mic.
Wow. The Mandel, the Frank Valley. Are those native?
Well, I use all kinds of words.
Okay. Wow.
So down here is Widdendream.
Uh-huh.
That's Widdendream. That's the crazy place. And you want to get to over here to Kialo. Now you can walk just along there, but you're not allowed to. Well, we'll find that out in the Barnabas Trail because that's the Barnabas Trail.
Uh-huh.
It's illegal to go on it, but you got to go through all this up here and then cross these last 3 mountains and so on. That's how you get there. And I still have to refer to it. Because there's a lot to absorb. And I'm working on a prequel now. So that takes place 117 years prior to the first book. Oh, wow. And yes, I guess I'm taking this very seriously because I have a lot to say.
fascinating.
I would
Truly,
love to have, I would love to have that map actually made by a professional, but I'm sure it would cost a lot of money.
to publish that map, that's yeah, I
Maybe
have
one
to
day.
say that I gotta, with all the stuff on my plate, but at some point I really want to explore what you're exploring here, and that could lead to another chance for us to kind of chat.
Mhm.
So it's kind of an agenda type thing. It fascinates me. You know, the Barnabas Trail is a big hospital near us, St. Barnabas.
Mhm.
Big hospital. Actually, it's became the second. Actually, I think it's the largest medical provider in the state. Barnabas Health System. So anyway,
I purposefully use names like Barnabas. He's a big player. He's 67 in book 1. He's 95 in book 3. Caleb is Axel's best friend. These names I use on purpose, because these people have a message. Eventually, something called outreach is created, where certain people leave from Kialo and go out and talk to people in different lands and different places. So these are terms that I freely use. And hold on, I'm on air right now. Thanks.
we're
No
we're not
problem.
formal.
Yeah.
We're not formal.
So and there's much more to it than that. I use all kinds of words that you wouldn't generally hear a person who has my worldview use, but I'm very open to all kinds of thoughts because I put people before anything else.
Okay, and there are lessons of life that are included in here, and lessons that, well, for you and I, we have it's called crystallized intelligence. Basically, it's folks like us who pool our everyday living and writing and thinking, because we've got 50 or 60 years under our belt of having lived and learned, and the experience which Gen Zs and millennials can't. They just, I mean, they've got a lot of input, but they don't have crystallized intelligence. That's basic experience that we're able to pool and develop and talk about and express. It's a great term.
Well, yeah, sorry. I guess that explains why I tried twice. Once when I was 17, of course, I was far too young. And the other time I was around 23, 24 to do that rock opera I always wanted to do, you know, and pull something like that off. If you know what, people, we call rock operas, Tommy and
right,
Quadrophenia. And
sure.
even like Thick as a Brick, which is not a rock opera, but is a long piece of music. And even when I was in my early 30s and well, 35 or so, we went into the studio, my old friends and we did a recording called Family Jewels. And it was a lot of hard work to pull off these big pieces of music as a band. So I don't know if it's I don't know if I could fully agree that it took me this age to be able to do this. Writing books, perhaps, but there's a lot of good things that our generation did when we were young. So I don't know what the young generation are doing, but I'd like to find out. And
Well,
if Pete Townsend could write Tommy, when he was young, then why couldn't a Gen Z or a millennial for sure write something equally as good?
I I couldn't even touch that, and I
Yeah.
couldn't even give it thought. Listen, I did teach, which was I did teach 3 years ago at Rutgers, career explorations, but twice a week for a semester I interacted with young people, met them before class, after class. So and I've got a great little cadre of millennials and Gen Zs that I interact with fairly often. and it's very rewarding for me because I'm able to cross that generation gap. It's funny, early on in developing this channel, I met this brilliant, he was a sophomore at Rutgers, a real computer whiz and digital marketing, all that kind of stuff. And so we became friends. We met on LinkedIn and we chatted, and we would chat once a week. And finally, after our second or third chat, I yelled, "Oh my God!" And we were zooming, and "Oh my God!" And he said, "What's the matter, Calvin?" I said, I just realized something. I'm a half century older than you. And it was a wow, but I was able, it's like Superman was able to leap tall buildings in a single bound. I was able to leap that generation gap in a single bound, and we were operating, and I was very rewarded by that. But I couldn't fathom what you proposed, John.
Well, I guess my point was that it isn't what we did when whatever age we were. I'm talking about our generation. I'm very opposed to these titles that we've imposed upon ourselves, and then we name generations. Postmortem, they're dead, and we name them we give them a name. I'm tripping over my own tongue, but it's about opportunities. That's what I noticed. And by the mid 90s, I was noticing that the opportunities I had as a person right out of college, moving from Montreal to Toronto, and sure, okay, I had a friend who, he got me this job, and then the amount that I was paying for rent was basically what I was making per week. And there was all these possibilities. I could have bought a house, but I didn't. That opportunity was no longer there by the mid 90s. And I tried to imagine, because a lot of students came into my edit suite at CTV, a certain time of year, they were like doing the internship and stuff like that. So I met a lot of young people that way. And I asked them questions, and it seemed to me that they're just not getting the same shake as I had. And that was mid 90s. So who knows what it's like now? The world's changed, and
It's changed.
I don't know what to say about it, but I
I don't
can't.
either.
I just can't forget what it was like to have long hair when my parents and adults didn't care for the way we looked, and they called us all kinds of names, but they didn't call us boomers, right? Even though technically that's what we were.
Right.
We were called the Me Generation, I think. It was an article that came out in the New York Times, and what was it, 75 or so? Then that's what perhaps they called us, but not the boomers. That came later.
No, boomers did come later, I think.
The term, I mean, we were called that because we were born when we were born,
Right.
but nobody used it as a term, as
So
a
we're
name.
actually, I'm looking, our title now, we've gone from boomers to being called, and I have my little chart over there. We're the silent, and I resent that.
Well, the silent generation, that's the one that they use to name the generation that is already dead, probably.
Well, no,
cares?
the silent generation numerically is 74 to 91.
Oh, okay. All right. Well,
I'm
like I said,
comfortably there.
I don't like any of these words,
No,
because
I
as
don't
soon as
either.
we have labels, we have reason to point our fingers at them.
Right. I don't like any of them
Yeah,
either.
it's just dumb,
Yeah.
I think there's finally a word that I hear on other channels and different places I listen, the word ageism. And if you notice, my third book, the Kialo Expansion, is a fictional analysis of bigotry.
Yeah, I saw that.
And bigotry comes in all kinds of flavors. And ageism is one of them. So
Interesting.
no, I guess I don't really like that, right? Kind of opinionated.
I don't like it either. I don't want to
But
be.
the whole Kialo trilogy is about how opinionated I am about things in this world and what I see is wrong. But instead of writing a book about me ranting on and on about what I think, I have my characters do it for
Right.
me.
Right. and I love to create characters. But my characters in the two books loosely based on me. Why? Because I know more about me than anybody else. I'm an expert, and
Yeah.
that's just the easiest way to write. Which is a very good segue as we kind of wrap this up. It's a perfect segue for your podcast. Tell me about your book, and I was charged and energized by the fact that you delve into the world of self-publishing in this, and we can talk about that now. You're self-published.
Yes.
And I'm self-published. I'm going to be a second time in a few months. And some people say, well, self-publishers aren't real writers, but you've got a podcast. Tell me about your book, and I've watched it, and I think it's great because you take us self-published people and put them on that pedestal. How did that come about? How did you?
Well, yeah, it's a lot of fun. It's a lot of fun to do. It's also a lot of work. I'm a one-man operation. So how it came about was just probably what a lot of self-published authors like myself who aren't very good at marketing, or maybe even marginally good at marketing, wonder about, daily, like, what am I doing here? Is anybody reading what I'm doing? And is this all worth it? Or, I sure would like to get out and have people more, like, have a bigger voice. And where can I go and do that? Well, I found actually since starting my podcast, there's a lot of podcasters doing this kind of stuff already. But I just naively went into the idea that, look, it's like you and I just met some social gathering, and you tell me that you wrote a book or two or whatever. And I would go, wow, great. Well, tell me about your book. And then you do that kind of thing. No genre specific. There are things I won't discuss. Of course, the things that are really not are nasty and stuff. But I just want to know about other people writing their books. I really sincerely want to devote that time where I'm going to sit with them. We have a pre-chat, have the actual, recorded chat, which could be, 20, 30 minutes long, and then have a post chat afterwards. We've connected, we made a friendship, and then I edit it together because I love editing and I can do it. And I put in the B-roll, and the more you give me, the nicer it's going to look. And put music underneath it. Probably, I don't know, make it look like a little television spot, and then upload it. And then it's all yours as an author to use that link any way you want. And it goes into a Facebook page, but it goes onto YouTube. And that's what I like to do. And I've met a lot of really nice people doing that. And I hope to keep doing it.
So have I. A lot of people I interview, authors, because I have that kinship, that brotherhood, that sisterhood.
Yeah.
With self-published authors. This is not the forum, but I'm not a huge fan of the official publishing industry. I don't like it, but that's beside the point. So we've come to the end of this. By the way, this was great stuff, John. And I'd like this to be, we talked about it, to be continued, to come back. We've got the simpatico of being self-published. That's a huge thing. And grab a hold of Gary, and maybe we can do some panels and things and experiment and
talk about certain aspects of it or whatever. I'd like to learn more about the marketing and of things. I'm probably, like many self-published authors, I don't have a good handle on that.
And I don't either, and I'm going to be faced with that whole world of trying to market and so forth and so on. I have notions of how to do it, but we can maybe all get together and try to figure things out and invite others. Hey, it's virtually unlimited.
It is, yeah.
By the way, and we're developing this as we're going along, but the whole world of self-publishing, that world of which we're part of, needs to have so much more devoted to it.
Yes, well, there technically it's so easy to do that. Write something, upload it. Well, you got to follow the format, whatever. You do all the right things.
yeah,
It's not that hard. Now, once you get it, you can get copies delivered to your house, but what are you going to do with it? So
that's something to think about.
reminds me of recording. Like it used to be back in the 70s, you wanted to go in a studio, you're going to have a lot of money. By the time we hit the 90s, even like the late 80s, you can do it at home. Once we got to the computers by the 2000s, just everyone had a studio.
Right.
Yeah.
So it's a whole different world. So I'm officially welcoming you to come back. Let's put our heads together and
All right.
and to continue this. You're perfectly delightful and insightful, and worldly. This has been, for me, this has been really very special.